Well, I'm David Hewitt, the Executive Director of the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute in Kingsville, Texas. I had heard about the Institute for years growing up or as a graduate student in the wildlife field, and was thrilled to get an opportunity to come down here in 1996 as a faculty member doing research on wildlife nutrition and eventually deer research, and then in 2018 became the director of the Caesar Kleberg Institute. One of the things that makes this position really appealing is the link with Caesar Kleberg. Caesar was a family member of the King Ranch family, came to South Texas in 1900 and worked on the King Ranch until his passing in 1946. During that time, he developed he came here with a strong passion for wildlife conservation, but while he was here, that continued to grow, and he realized how important wildlife can be for people, for their health, for the economic viability of areas, and really was a visionary in looking how wildlife could be contributing to communities in the future. So during that time working on the King Ranch, he helped bring wildlife into the ranching enterprise and made it part of the equation that helps a ranch function. When he passed, or before he passed, he penned a will, and part of that will was to establish what's called the Caesar Kleberg Foundation for Wildlife Conservation. And in doing that, he stated why he felt wildlife was important. And just to go to his words in his will, he said about the importance of wildlife conservation for its beneficial effects upon the health, habits, and character of the American people. And that speaks volumes, and I think that was an approach to the natural world that was really unique for that time, and put an entire estate into a foundation for wildlife conservation showed how important wildlife was to Caesar Kleberg. If you fast forward a little bit to the 1981, the trustees of that foundation took a lot of Caesar's vision and the resources that were being made available through his foundation and established the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute here in Kingsville at Texas A&M, A&I at the time, now Texas A&M University, Kingsville. And the mission of the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute is to do applied research to help people who care about wildlife manage those resources, including the soils and the plants and the wildlife that rely on those basic resources, and help people manage those so that they can continue to enjoy and have wildlife and natural places as part of our lives. So when Caesar was working at the King Ranch, he spent a lot of his time down on Norreus, and Norreus is a special place along the coast, beautiful oak woodlands, big open native grasslands, just a beautiful spot. And while he was working there, it was a time when a railroad was being built from Kingsville down to the lower Rio Grande Valley. And there was a lot of activity and workers, and those workers needed to eat. And different people affiliated with that operation were helping feed the workers by going out and harvesting wildlife, which at that time was legal, it could happen, but it was very impactful on those wildlife populations. And Caesar saw those wildlife populations dwindling as a result of those activities, and became really concerned because wildlife meant a lot to him. And he did something that a lot of people have a hard time doing. He took it upon himself. He said, I'm not going to rely on somebody else to do this. I'm going to institute some hunting regulations. And there was no state agency to do that. There was no one to take responsibility for wildlife at that time except individuals. And so Caesar stepped up and did that. And they were real common sense regulations. No hunting deer during the rut, which is a time when deer are really susceptible to hunting because they're trying to breed. No hunting over water holes, because that's a key resource for the wildlife to get access to. No hunting quail on the covey flush. You had to go find individual birds after the covey had initially flushed. Things like that, and it made a difference. And over time, those wildlife populations on Norreus and other parts of the King Ranch began to grow. And those populations eventually became source stock for reintroducing deer and turkey around the state of Texas and even across the southeastern United States. because of a lot of that work and interest and expertise that Caesar had developed, he was named to the Texas Game, Fish, and Oyster Commission at the time, which is now Texas Parks and Wildlife. That's the state agency that is responsible for managing the state's Wildlife Resource Institute resources. Caesar's position on that was right when that commission was first established. So he helped kind of set the tone for that state agency, and wrote some of the initial laws and regulations, and really kind of set the path that we're all enjoying now. The healthy, productive wildlife populations that we have throughout the state are due in a large part to that state agency and its ability to work with the landowners and the Texas public to manage all of our wildlife resources. So Caesar has been influential in influencing wildlife conservation in South Texas and increasingly across Texas and across the nation. In 2009, the Texas legislature recognized this importance and passed a bill designating Caesar as the father of wildlife conservation in Texas. And that's been really impactful because it's brought his ideas out into the public and helped make sure that others recognize not only the work that Caesar had done in the past, but his vision for the future and why wildlife and conservation of natural resources is so important. So one of the huge impacts that Caesar Kleberg had with his foundation was the establishment eventually of the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute. And we just celebrated our 40th anniversary a couple of years ago. And during that 40-year period, the Caesar Kleberg Institute has grown into a nationally, even internationally recognized research institute. And because of the incredible faculty and impactful wildlife programs we have here, we attract students from all over the country. We do our wildlife research primarily through graduate studies, which means master's and PhD students. And about 60% of our students come from outside the state. So we're not only training up biologists from Texas, but we're also attracting the best and brightest students from around the country to come here and work on our wildlife conservation issues. And after our students finish up, many of them stay in Texas and continue to work here, but others go back home. They go to other parts of the country, other parts of the world, and work on wildlife conservation. And they bring Caesar's thinking and his model of wildlife conservation and applied wildlife research with them. And the importance of private landowners and private land stewardship is a big part of what they learn here as well. And that makes our students marketable. They can go different places in the country and because they know how to work with private landowners and they understand the importance of private lands, they can integrate that into their jobs, and it gives them a leg up and helps make them more marketable and more effective in their conservation efforts. So while the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute started here in South Texas, and it started here with a strong focus in South Texas, the work we do is valuable to people beyond this region. One really good example is a program we have called Texas Native Seeds, and it's designed to get seed sources of native plants in the hands of people that need to do restoration. And that program is now active throughout the state of Texas. We have people in East Texas and the coastal prairies and Central Texas and West Texas and in the Panhandle doing active work in native plant restoration. Also, a number of projects on game species up in the Panhandle, mule deer, elk, pronghorn, a lot of bird, especially quail projects, Montezuma quail out in West Texas, scale quail in West Texas and in different places across South Texas. We've done work on some species that cause problems for people, like wild pigs and nilgai antelope, not only here in South Texas, but across the state. Feral pigs are a problem not only in Texas but across the country, and we work with scientists across the country on how to manage feral pigs to minimize their impact. A lot of the work, even though we do it locally here, has impacts throughout the continent, and that part of it is because of our location. Here in South Texas, we're really at the pinch point for wildlife or for bird and bat migration. birds that aren't going to be wanting to deal with mountains to the west or the Gulf of Mexico to our east are all funneled right up here along the Gulf Coast, and those species end up throughout the continent. And so anybody who enjoys birds and monarch butterflies and all the good ecological work that bats do has a stake in South Texas and the land management in South Texas, and we not only study those migration patterns but also study the habitat and give landowners the information they need to be able to manage our resources here. And again, the whole continent benefits from that. Increasingly, our scientists are doing work even beyond the borders of the United States. So we've had a number of projects in Mexico, in part because the wildlife doesn't respect the Rio Grande as a border. It crosses, and so making sure that we're helping people in Mexico meet their conservation needs is not only good for them, but good for us. And there's some species, especially some of the wild cats. We've had work in Asia and currently have a leopard project in Africa, again, because of the expertise of our scientists and people recognizing, that expertise can really help them meet their wildlife conservation needs across the world. So it's interesting to think about, Caesar, born in Cuero, in 1873. He grew up in a natural world where people were part of that world, and everybody he knew would have been involved with agriculture at some standpoint, or at least real close to an area where they could get out and enjoy the natural world. If he was transported up to our current day, and stepped out into Dallas or San Antonio or somewhere where a majority of our people live now, I think he would be struck with the disconnect between people and the natural world. And I think he would get this idea, well, I know he would get this idea that every one of those people relies on the natural world for their food, for their water, for their air, for their mental health, for really everything. And that disconnect is a problem not only for those individuals, but we don't have people that are advocates and passionate about the natural world, about soils and plants and wildlife, because they don't have that connection. They don't understand how important that natural world is for them in a big picture way, whether it's climate and carbon capture, whether it's the wildlife they enjoy, it's the food that they are relying on in their grocery store came from wild species at one point. So I think Caesar understood, why the natural world was so important for every one of us, and really our very survival. Basic things like food and water and clean air. And so, if Caesar was transported into today's age, I think something that he would really want to see done is to rebuild that connection between people and the natural world. And he was brought to the natural world through agriculture, through grazing, through horses, and also through hunting. And that got him close to wildlife and gave him a passion for wildlife. And what we need is for everybody to develop something that gives them a connection to the natural world and helps make them passionate about it, and therefore advocates for it. And whether that's walking in a green space and near their home, whether it's backpacking in the mountains far away, whether it's bird watching or taking pictures of wildlife in the backyard, maybe hunting, maybe fishing. There's all kinds of things that ways to bring people in connection with the natural world and give them a reason to care about it, way beyond the obvious things of clean air, clean water, food. There's sometimes those are maybe too abstract to think about, but when you realize, hey, tomorrow I may not have a place to get out into the world and do something that means a lot to me, that brings wonder to my life, that becomes something that people are going to act on. And so I could see Caesar recognizing the importance of that connection between people and the natural world. This is an exciting time for wildlife conservation. We've got people like Jay Kleberg and Ben Masters and others who are doing some wonderful film work that is helping, I think, people that don't have a direct connection to the land understand how important wildlife is and what a treasure that we're sitting on here in Texas. The River and the Wall was one movie that really focused on the Rio Grande River and its conservation value and how inspiring it can be. A movie called Deep in the Heart is focusing on wildlife throughout Texas and tells stories of everything from small fish in caves several hundred feet underground to bison in the Panhandle, ocelots in South Texas, and out into the Gulf of Mexico, and it's real inspiring. Another movie that's coming up is called Chasing the Tide, and it's going to talk about how important the coastal environments are in Texas, and we've got some of the most beautiful undeveloped coastlines anywhere in the United States, and a lot of people have no idea. A lot of Texans have no idea that it's there and how special it is, and the conservation value and the species of plants and animals that all these environments support. So again, it's exciting times, and I encourage everybody to find their niche in the natural world, and movies like Jay Kleberg's been working on will help highlight the different ways that people can get involved. I think all of us are looking for ways to make sure that we can enjoy life, and life can be enriching, and find the beauty and wonder in life, and for a lot of people that comes from the natural world. But if you don't know a lot about the natural world, I think you miss a lot of the beauty and wonder that's out there. And that was sort of driven home to me back in graduate school, where I was going to Virginia Tech, and we had to pick a book to read, and we were given total freedom. And I'd run onto a book called Pilgrim from Tinker Creek, written by Annie Dillard, and there were a whole bunch of things in there that were really interesting and eye-opening. But one of the concepts that's really stuck with me over the years is this idea that your ability to enjoy something grows as you know more and more about it. And I think that's especially true of the natural world. People that don't have a lot of understanding of, let's say, the plant communities off the roadside, see a rangeland or a desert type area as something just to drive through and get by. But as they get more understanding, then their ability to enjoy that time driving through that area grows and grows, and before you know it, they're stopping and they're getting out and they're looking, and they're really captivated. When without that kind of ability and knowledge of those systems, it was something that wasn't contributing to their life. And I think if we can get people to engage more with the natural world and the resources like Deep in the Heart and other ways of learning about the natural world, everybody's lives will be that much more enriched, and again, they'll be passionate about the natural resources and the natural world that's out there. Well, so I cheated a little bit. I had a grandfather who was a wildlife biologist, and so I grew up knowing that, hey, you can get paid to do wildlife work. And so, I never struggled with what I was going to do as a career.